Alright, Stack, I know they probably cannot see you, but I swear if you topple over, I'm going to kill myself. You are scaring me. Let's talk fantasy. Let's talk about the 20, 40, 34 series I started last year, not counting the ones I started and finished. And we are gonna rank this series from worst to best. Also with a quick mention to the series I started by DNF the first book, so I'm not counting in this 34 series. The first title in the DNF pile is the first book in the Chaos Cycle. I made it around 60% into the book and I realized I did not care about the plot, I did not care about the characters, I was not really even paying attention at that point, so I put it aside. But I want to read Dragon Mage by the same author, so probably when I finish that one, if I like it, I might try to go back to this one. The second title was the first book in the Expeditionary Force. Now this is the most straight white American man thing I've ever read in my life. I lasted I think 50 pages and believe me, there were enough. Next title is the first book in the Dragon Tierna series. Now I'm going to be petty here because I could not handle anymore said. Every time a character said something, said this character. Another character replied to the conversation, said this character, said. After every single interaction, said. I could not handle it anymore. I wish for the characters to never talk to each other so I didn't have to read another said. And I think I found a new pet peeve of mine because I could not do with another book like this. With the amount of verbs that there are out there, not even answer or question, nothing, just said. The next title in the DNF pile is the first book in the Dragon Child Prophecy series, trilogy, I don't know. I should have known by the cover that this was not for me, and I lasted I think 20 pages, but on 20 pages I could tell you this was coming of age YA romantasy, the most cliché type of it. And I'm just not the target audience for this book. And the last title in the DNF pile is the first book in the Myth of the Dragon series. I blame the cover here, it's absolutely gorgeous, but when I was reading this I think I lasted 160 pages, and this felt like a YA version of Lies of Lord Glamora, but way more YA than Six of Crows. Just imagine Lies of Lord Glamora for 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds, something like that. And starting with the series, I will not be continuing. In number 34 we have the Chronicles of the Black Company. I was so hyped to read the Black Company because this is one of the pioneers of the Grindr fantasy. This put one of the first tones to build the basis of what is now my favorite genre, and this was such a disappointment. This reminded me a lot to the chapters of The Named Men in the First Love trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, with Tulduru, with Black Dow, but these characters didn't even pretend that they were doing the right thing. I could not even enjoy their company because they were not morally great characters. Morally great would be the main character, the main POV who is narrating everything that's going on with the Black Company. But the rest of the company were just murdering innocent people, abusing everyone that they found, and even raping people. And I was like, no, that's a line that we don't cross in Grindr Fantasy, where you go from morally great character to directly the villain. And I finished it and I said, no, I cannot do this anymore. On number 33, we have the first book in the D.I. Tanner series, and this is a thriller murder mystery. I wanted to step out of all the fantasy I was reading at the moment, and I probably picked the worst book to do it. This was so ignorant and misogynistic, and luckily for me, there was a lot of conversation, it read quick, I finished it in one day, I will never touch anything else by the author. On number 32, we have the Golden Chronicles, and I'm afraid this is it for me with this author. I tried with two of his titles, the first book in two different series, and it's just not for me. The way that he writes characters, the way that he writes the stories, the way that I can see the plot coming, the way that there's nothing, like he tries to step out of regular fantasy, and yet I don't get to enjoy it. Even when it's entirely what I love to read, I don't. So 2 out of 2, really low ratings for both books. No, out. On number 31, we have the Destiny Cycle. In this story, we have a main character who goes to an elite school that apparently will make her a noble, demigod, a god, something like that. I didn't get to really understand, because after 500 pages of noble building and almost no interaction with other characters, I only knew through her eyes what she was doing in the school and what other characters were doing, but that's it. On number 30, I read the first book in the Jan's Wall series, and this is not for me. This was a fairy tale story for children with a couple of touches, a bit darker, but I was not the target audience, I didn't enjoy it, that's about it. On number 29, we have the first book in the Outside trilogy, and this was confusing. This is a sci-fi story about another universe and a superior entity in this other universe trying to invade ours. And it's really confusing because there are angels, but they are basically humans without emotions. There's no sign of like halo, wings, whatever, nothing like that. And I did not like the fact that the main character is autistic, which are normally the kind of characters I relate to easily, and I could not understand anything that this character was doing. There were no traits of autism that you could read about. She got triggered by loud noises and just didn't like to step out of her routine, but that was about it. I don't think I'm clever enough to understand the series. On number 28, we have the first book in the Blood Source arc. Now, this is apparently my fault. I read too much fantasy and I read this kind of plot 700 times. You know, the kind of band of mercenaries or bandits that are soulless and they go around killing people and they have no limits, but then they get one member that has a soul and tells them all the time, "No, but you don't have to do it, you can be one of the good ones." And they kind of stop doing it and they become good people but still being morally grey, bad people sort of. I saw this coming with better plots, better characters, a better story, so I was not going to put myself through this again when the rest of the story wasn't good enough. On number 27, we have the first book in the Halfling saga. I know this is a romantasy, I know this is not my genre, I know I don't like to read this type of books, but still I decided to try. Because you never know until you try, and I shouldn't have done it. I am aware that in romantasy there's always the enemies to lovers and the romantic tension between two characters, it always happens, but I can take it as long as it makes sense. It didn't make sense in this book. You cannot pretend a character is sassy enough to kiss the other main character throughout the first fight, and then 2 chapters later they meet and he's very shy. It doesn't match. On number 26, I don't know if this counts as a series or if it's a series of standalones, but I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the second book in the Captain Nemo series, I think. While I love the idea and I think Jules Verne writes beautifully, this was kind of boring because they spent half of the book just explaining everything that's going around with the submarine or talking about geography and talking about science, but just spitting facts, like not really moving the story. It's a short book and yet the story takes forever to happen. On number 25, we have the first book in the Dragon Blood Assassin series. Another pet peeve of mine is that I don't like to guess the plot so early in a book, because I don't even try to guess what the characters are going to do, how the plot is going to develop. So if without even trying, on the first 50, 100 pages, I can see how the characters are going to react to certain things, how the plot is going to move, and what the characters are going to do, I'm going to get pissed. And while the story isn't bad and the characters aren't bad, that triggered me. But this is one I might give a second chance. And on number 24, we have the Dragon Maid series. I read book 1, DNF book 2. I had a good time with book 1 because it's an Arthurian myth-inspired fantasy, but the characters were really flat. There was actually nothing going on here for these characters. One character say, "Oh, we are going to attack from the back and it's going to be a success." Other characters, "Yeah, we are going to do it." 2 pages later, they attack from the back and the attack was a success. And yet the story was entertaining enough to read the first book, see the betrayals that you could see coming and see how they were going to play. But book 2 was an entire different thing. I got lost from the beginning. We go with a new set of characters in another part of this universe with nothing really connecting book 1 and 2, and I was entirely confused. There were gods and demigods and they were fighting, but that's as far as I went. On number 23, starting the series I will be continuing, the first one is Terrible Worlds Revolutions by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a sci-fi futuristic version of Earth, very American inspired, with big robots, a critique on capitalism. It was short, fast-paced, fun. I want more of this. On number 22, and finally one from the stack, is 1000 Li by Tao Won, and this is the special edition book that he sent me, and this is absolutely gorgeous. This is cultivation fantasy and I'm really new into this genre, but I'm enjoying because it feels like reading anime but without the drawings. It's Chinese inspired and we are following this main character who comes from a farmer village, and through sheer relentlessness and dedication, he joins this elite school to be a warrior. There's even a moment in the story where he's sent out to the wall to find a specific something and gets to fight this white massive snake, which I think is my first part of the story. It's really fast paced, I already have book 2 and I cannot wait to read it. On number 21 we have The Ninth Force Bar by Oliver Dement. This is another indie book and let me show you, I'm not sure if you can see it from there, but the map of this thing is entirely gorgeous. And Oliver Dement has a way of storytelling that I haven't seen before. We have 4 POVs, but we are not jumping from POV to another. We have first a bunch of pages from one POV, then another bunch of pages, another one, and another one, without coming back to the others. So the story is evolving throughout these 4 POVs, but we don't really know if we are going to see these characters again. I guess we'll have to read book 2 to find out. On number 20 we have The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. Murderbot is such a fun character, I could read 20 more novellas of him, and it's true that the story is not quite there because I enjoy books 1 to 4 way more than the rest, but he's a diva. He's the diva of us introverts because he just wants to stay home watching his TV show and not being bothered. On number 19 we have Burning Blade and Silver Eye by Django Wessler. I read Ashes of the Sun and I can totally see the Star Wars Arcane vibes, but these characters are unnecessarily horny all the time. I like the world building, and as always, I'm all for a story where the characters are trying to topple the government because they only feed them abuse and misinformation. I also like the fact that brother and sister are in both sides of this political power movement. But the character work needs to do better. Anyway, I'm reading the rest of the series this year. On number 18 is The Elder Empire C by Will White. This is the author of the Cradle series. I heard that this trilogy has another trilogy that you have to tandem read. I never read tandem anything, so I might reread book 1 and read book 1 of the other trilogy and try to pair them, like probably chapter in chapter. I don't know how to do it. Interesting creatures, interesting world building. The magic system reminds me a lot to the Foundry side. There's power movement here between two factions after the death of the Emperor, so it's really entertaining. On number 17 we have The Legends of the First Empire by Michael J. Sullivan. I've been told this is not the best way to start with Michael J. Sullivan universe, so I might put off continuing with the series until I read the Rhydia Chronicles. I'm a sucker for world building. I've seen the world building that is developed in this first book, and this is going to be for me. And the characters are really well done, which is not something that happens always, and I love it when it does. Mr. Sullivan, you got a new fan. On number 16 we have The Forever Desert, and it's crazy how books so short can have a story so rich. I believe both of these novellas together are less than 200 pages, and it's crazy the punch to the throat that you get when you finish each of these books. And I actually think the ideas of these novellas are perfect for the moments that we are living in, with all the misinformation that the government feeds us. This is just perfect. I might have to text Thor books to see if I can get an arc because I don't think I can wait to summer to finish the entire trilogy. On number 15 we have the first book in the Thomas Cromwell series, Wolf Hall. This is historical fiction, and if you have the chance to listen to the audiobook of this, I strongly recommend it. It's the drama, the politics between characters on one side and the other, is the way that Hilary Mantel wrote these characters, and it's the way that this narrator brought them to life. This was incredible, 5 stars. On number 14 we have the first book in The Faithful and the Fallen by John Wayne. At the moment I'm recording this, I'm halfway through book 3, but I will only talk about book 1, which is the one I read last year. This is generic fantasy. This is what comes to people's minds when you talk about fantasy. But there are a lot of POVs, and this is a big story. Classic story of good versus evil, but really well done. On number 13 we have the Lockdown series by Tamsin Muir. I read the 3 books and all the short stories, and Gideon is my favorite character with maybe an exception from John. This might not be everyone's opinions, but I think Gideon the Ninth is the best book in the series. Might be because I love Gideon. And each book in this series gets more and more confusing, but I think the character work makes everything worth it. Do you think we will get Electo the Ninth this year? No, me neither. On number 12 we have The Southern Reach by Jeff Vandermeer. This felt like a sci-fi alien version of The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And I do have to say to anyone who wants to read this book, don't try to understand what's going on because the characters themselves don't know it. You just go with the flow and enjoy the craziness. On number 11 we have the Rook and Rose trilogy by M.A. Kerrick. I read books 1 and 2. This is a slow-paced heist fantasy with little to no world building because everything happens in the same city, but there's a lot of drama and politics in between these characters. I love the way that they use different nationalities and languages, but do not ask me how the magic system works, I have no idea. And starting the top 10 we have the Blackton series by Christopher Buehlman. I only read the prequel. I'm a third of the way into the Blackton Thief, probably one of the best books I've ever read, so I will only talk about the Daughter's Wars. This is a full-on war campaign against the goblins. We are following a legion of female soldiers because there are no more men to recruit, and these female soldiers have as companions huge war ravens. I had a great time with this, but this is dark and probably not for everyone. On number 9 we have the Grimbourne Saga by Fonda Lee, and I think this is the closest thing that we have to the Godfather with magic. The idea behind these magic systems and the battle scenes are incredible, and I can totally see why this is so famous in the fantasy space. I'm just scared, because I read what people say about the rest of the series. I'm scared. I might read it this year, but I'm scared. On number 8 we have the Founders trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett. I've only read book 1, but what a book. Another heist fantasy, and the magic system is really new and unique. I just didn't expect that one of the 2 main characters was going to be a sentient key and such a fun character, like I was laughing out loud. And all of this on a universe that is trying to build itself on the ashes of an ancient society is just the top of the top. On number 7 we have Le Fay by Sophie Kitsch. I read books 1 and 2, I'm waiting for the conclusion. This is an Arthurian myth retelling from the point of view of Morgan Le Fay, because we've always heard about Arthur and about Merlin, but we never listened to Morgan's story, and this gives an entire twist to both of the other 2 characters. This is pure female rage. It feels so natural into this myth that something like this could happen, and I need the conclusion. I need it for tomorrow. And on number 6 we have Anne of Green Gables by L.T. Montgomery, I think. I watched the TV show, I love it, I wanted to read the books, I grabbed book 1, I cried like my mother never fed me. The whole book feels like a warm hug, and when I started the book I thought Anne was such an annoying character, but the more you get to read about her, the more you get to love her. I didn't expect that we could get to this point, but for sure I'm reading the rest of the series. Okay, on number 5 we start with the Galeson series by Shanna Lawless, and I can tell you right now, you've never read an unhinged character, not even Cersei Lannister, close to Gormlach. I read books 1 and 2, I got the novellas, I'm waiting for the third book, which is already out but not in this edition, and when it's out I'm going to binge it. Historical fiction fantasy set in Ireland, late 10th century, early 11th century, and the characters and the slow-paced, slow-burn romance, but also politicking between Vikings and Saxons and Irish kings, it was incredible. It's just insane that this is a debut novel. And speaking of debut novels, The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan was something that got me entirely by surprise. The balance of power in this medieval German-inspired fantasy between law and religion, and the one upholding it is a necromancer magic user. How did we get to here? The magic system and the way that you see the morality of the main character crumble, top notch. I read this last month, in the next few weeks I'm going to be reading the rest of the series. And on number 3 we have the best heist fantasy ever written, and that is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. Reading this for the first time was such an experience, and I can totally understand how people are screaming at Scott Lynch, please release the sequels. I'm not sure if I want to read books 2 and 3 soon, seeing as we don't have a release for the 4th. This is a book that works really well as a standalone, and I see myself in a future reading this book by itself. Also, the bromance between Locke and Jan is something I've been craving in fantasy. And on number 2, a book everyone was pushing me to read, and I wanted to hate it just for the sole reason, and I'm thankful that they did, is The Will of the Many by James Ellington. I DNF'd this when I was like 80-85 pages in, because I was enjoying the world building, but it was getting really slow, everything moving at a very slow pace. I was not getting all the hype that was going around this book. It got to part 2, I understood it. From part 2, this book skyrocketed, the last 150 pages of this book are mental, and that ending, if you don't have the sequel to this book, and we all don't have it yet because we are waiting for it, don't read it, because you will read the ending, you will need answers. It's giving me nightmares, don't do it to yourself. And my favorite book of 2024 is, to no one's surprise, The Trouble with Peace by Joe Abercrombie. Who would have thought your favorite book is an Abercrombie book? What can I tell you? I'm a sucker for his work. This has some of the best characters I've ever read in my life, not just in the First Law universe, but ever, because Rike and Orso, they could not get any better. And while the First Law trilogy is a representation of how capitalism grows in a society, this is a representation of how we take down capitalism, and I love the parallel. I finished this 4 minutes to midnight, and I could not make it the first book of 2025. I had to make it the last book of last year. As always, as an Abercrombie fan myself, if you haven't read the First Law trilogy, go for it, you are in for a treat. Oh, well, I don't know if I can make YouTube content, I don't talk that much. Yeah, well, you've proven yourself wrong here. Anyway, I'm going to try to make this a bi-weekly thing, so if you have any request of what you would like to see in my channel, let me know. I might try to make it happen. Fuck it.